Friends, good morning. Good morning. It is 9:01, and every minute we have together is precious and fleeting, especially when we have a guest like Jean McCord to lead us. And so, those who were here last year got to know a bit of Jean's, incredible teaching and background. But we're blessed to have her here to teach on. I have not looked at this in a week, but it's Cherokee spirituality in a time of climate change. I'm close, right? Yeah. Well, we've been looking at this issue of climate this fall, and bringing in Jean and her background and perspective seemed like an excellent addition to this fall series. So, Jean, we're so blessed to have you. Take it away.
OCO. I'm honored to be here. I really am. I had such a wonderful time with all of you last February, and I'm just really thrilled to be invited back again. The subject, my first thought was Indian thinking on the environment. Yeah, we're for it. What do we say? Although, and I'm not being political here, but one of the presidential candidates said just the other day, no one talks about the environment anymore. Yeah, that's just a hoax. So I'm here to talk to you about a hoax. Okay. I fought with these glasses last time I was here. I'm not going to even bother with them. I think I can see you. I like to start with beginnings. I think beginnings are important. I think we need to know where we've come from in order to know where we are now. Several years ago, and I know I'm going to be verbose this morning, I apologize. Bear with me. A number of years ago, one of my sons was the director of the he was in Chuk in Micronesia, the director of the law. Why don't words come to you? You get to a certain age, and then you have the picture in front of you. Anyway, it was the public defenders anyway, and he invited me to come to Chuk, which was very, very interesting. The first day I was there, he took me to his office. He was going to do a few things, and I just picked up a book that was on the shelf, and it happened to be a book that was a number of essays. And the first thing that I read was this: humans have never been content with images of our immediate environment. We have always been curious about the larger environment, about the stars, weather, animals, and plants, and our own subtle and incomprehensible processes. And we have always sought to extend our image of the world out towards the universe, moving through magic and superstition, speculative philosophy and mythology, into poetry, religion, and science. This is written by a man named Kenneth Boulding, and his speech was Economics of Pollution. I read the rest of the article, but I have to tell you I didn't understand a word of it. But I love what he said here. Poetry, religion, and science. They're all such diverse ways of thinking about the same kind of things. The far-reaching processes of our own thoughts and minds and experiences. The beauty in the diversity of our human thinking is that each of us can look at the same thing and have different images and thoughts and ideas and even emotions about it. In so many ways, learning about the diversity of our thinking allows us to broaden our understanding and to expand our ways of thinking when we listen, talk, and share with others. In many cases, we realize that most issues, most experiences are multifaceted, and that no one group or person has the complete and single way of understanding. I believe that it is equally important to address our differences than our samenesses, especially because they are not simply differences of opinion or perspective. They are actually not just linguistic or theological or cultural differences, but they are existential differences. Our understandings of the world, of how to live, even what it means to be human, have their roots in the very awakenings of the human spirit. The problem arises when one group is dominant and asserts that theirs is the only correct religion, culture, government, or even apparel. Theirs is the only valid way of understanding the world and all that dwells therein, and they dismiss the integrity and validity of other understandings. This was apparent when the first explorers came into contact with the people on our shores. The explorers called it the New World. When the first explorers came to these shores, they decided that the people, if they were people, greeting them were a bunch of wild savages, uncivilized, undisciplined, and heathens. And yet, the people, and they were people, had been watching the approach of strange vehicles for several days at least. And they didn't know what they were because they were so much bigger than anything they'd seen. Were they beings? Were they fish? Were they like large canoes? They would have been curious, intrigued, worried, excited. They would have called their councils together and sat in council and talked. Is this good for the people or is it bad for the people? I guess we found out, didn't we? When the ships got close enough and small boats were launched, the people on shore could see that, well, they were two-legged, but they were very hairy. Were they men? Were they gods? Were they beasts? But the people went out to greet them, and they were dressed in their finest, their hides and furs and capes made of turkey feathers, hair dressed in the traditional style, adorned with shells, copper, and pearl necklaces, and the feathers of various birds denoting their authority. They greeted the newcomers graciously, escorting them to the council house, offering food and water. The habit of personal hygiene was not upon these strange visitors, even after 2 months or so in boats. So before long, the atmosphere within the council house got to be pretty ripe. The hosts contained their laughter. Indians always have gone to water every day. What the native people did not know is that when the colonizers arrived in this hemisphere, they carried with them the blessings of the Pope, set forth in the Doctrine of Discovery, Papal Bull Inter Caetera of 1493. In this doctrine, it was made clear that the Spaniards could claim all the land they discovered for Spain and should convert all the natives to Catholicism. And any native who was too stubborn to submit was to be dispatched to the nether world hastily. It was no difference, it made no difference to these people that these natives did not understand the language they were speaking. According to the Pope, sorry, well, okay. He felt that the words of the gospel were just so self-evident that you didn't need to know what the language was. So the doctrine of discovery carried with it not just permission to claim the lands, but to assert the authority of the European culture and the Christian religion over these savages. So as more and more colonizers moved to this land, the doctrine of superiority became the norm. Intellectual, cultural, and theological superiority. And they could enforce it because they had superior weapons and more powerful diseases. And they reduced the Indian population to a more manageable proportion. There was little effort on their part to understand other belief systems or to appreciate other cultures, much less to recognize that we have an entirely different way of approaching our Mother Earth, ourselves, and the environments in which we live. While the colonizers came here, they said for religious reasons, their greater desire was for land, because in Europe, the land was owned by the wealthy landowners, the kings, and what have you. But when these people got to these shores, they saw these vast lands, and they wanted them. They wanted all of them. And not only that, they knew that God wanted them to have all of these lands. Because from the very beginning of time, when God made people, He told them to multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. And just look at all this land that needed subduing. The fact that Indians were in the way was an inconvenience, but not insurmountable. Subduing them, as with nature and wild animals, was expedient and philosophically rationalized. Indians did not know how to use the land properly. They wandered all over it, and they didn't farm properly the way the Europeans did. And to make things worse, even the women participated in the government. But in addition, obviously, the Indians were lazy, dirty, and ignorant with no organization, guiding principles, morals, or religion. And this was an attitude that persisted for several centuries, and there's an undercurrent of it even now. All you have to do is turn the news on. But in 1934-36, there's a book written remembering the days in the 1800s when this was a predominant thinking. Mrs. Scott said she hoped to goodness they would have no trouble with the Indians. Land knows they never do anything with this country themselves. All they do is roam around over it like wild animals. Treaties or no treaties, the land belongs to folks and farming. That's only common sense and justice. Little House on the Prairie by Loring Hulse Wilder. In 1893, my husband's great-grandfather wrote this about the wagon train that he and his wife had taken some 20 years before. There were new converts to Mormonism and they were going to Salt Lake. When I think about crossing this country when Denver was only known as a frontier settlement of about 100 people on the border of the Platte River, he also didn't use periods, whose inhabitants were mostly the rough Western adventurers and trappers and fierce Indians. There on the road to Pikes Peak, White men and women were murdered and scalped by the red devils that reigned supreme. Not far from here it was that the Indians attacked the Danish train, and where, if you remember, you had to get in the wagon and not be seen when we passed through that grove of trees where the devils had just been. And to think, his great-grandson married one of those red devils. Over time, people who have lived here since time immemorial, their thoughts and ideas were dismissed. And yet, because we Indians do not understand the nature of the world using the Western paradigms, does not mean we have no understanding of the world. Indigenous people have a very particular and profound understanding of the world and our relationship to the natural world. Gregory Coyetti describes this as the creative participatory process of native science and is the result of sophisticated and multi-level understandings of ecological processes. We tell the stories that characterize our development as human beings and our ever-evolving relationships with this land. Our stories, as Coyetti says, are simultaneously evolutionary, ecological, spiritual, psychological, and creative. In the Cherokee stories of creation, humans were created last, although not the best. And we were created to give honor to the cedar tree. That is our purpose. But through our stories, we have many stories, we learn that the animals have so much to teach us if only we would listen, if we would be patient and humble and learn from them. Birds make nests in the trees for shelter. I brought a bird's nest. And we're to watch the animals and see what we can learn from them. So if you study the birds, you look at it, then you see the earliest dwellings that our people made. We learned from the animals, we learned from the birds. We watched raccoons as they washed their food. We thought maybe that would be a good idea. We watched squirrels gather nuts and hide them in the hollows of trees. Also learning maybe we should start to do this and lay things aside for winter. It's said that the bears once talked with people and taught them what they needed to know. And when the people got greedy and killed too many four-legged, the animals caused disease to spread upon them. Then the plants took pity on the people and taught them how to make medicines. There was and continues to be a constant interaction between the people and the plants and the animals and the air and water, land, fire, and people. One of the things we had to learn early on was gratitude, giving gratitude for what this whole world had given us. Our understanding of the world and of the animals and what we learned from them was not just for survival, but it was for our curiosity too. And the experience of wonder and joy as we discovered these processes and the details of existence. These processes moved us from physical knowledge into the spiritual. We learned about the cycles of time and space, and We began to celebrate them. Our ceremonies are visible representations of our responsibility as human beings to participate in the ongoing recreation of the earth. So this month is our Cherokee New Year. And in the Cherokee New Year, we all bring the gifts from our fields and from the trees, the food that we have harvested, and we have a big feast. But at one point during the ceremony, we all go to the water, dip ourselves 7 times. When we get out of the water, we look at a crystal that has been placed on a stump that a priest has placed there. And if we can see ourselves in the crystal standing up, that means we will survive this next year. If, however, we see ourselves lying down, we may not make it through the year. We're out of harmony, we're out of balance. And those people go aside and they do some more ceremonies to see if potentially they can live for the next year. In 1964, I graduated from North High School here in Columbus. Anybody North High? Yay, polar bears? During my years in high school, I was a member of Junior Achievement. Anybody?
Yeah.
Okay. In JA, we learned to put into practice what we were learning in school about American capitalism. We celebrated rugged individualism, free enterprise, laissez-faire, work ethic, entrepreneurship, small government, self-interest. We also learned that we are a Christian nation and that Christianity is the best religion there is. We recited the Lord's Prayer every morning after the pledge, and we learned that capitalism is the best economic system there ever was. We learned about the glories of the Industrial Revolution, when business and industry took priority over the environment, the flora and fauna, and humans. And we learned about the great natural resources that our country abounds in. We did not learn that the exploitation of resources while providing raw goods for industry decimated landscapes, polluted air and water, and left people jobless, impoverished, and suffering from the diseases attributable to pollution and poverty. Black lung, cancers, cardiovascular disease, liver and kidney disease, respiratory diseases, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and all of the mental health issues that lead to addictions and alcoholisms. All these problems are complex and multifaceted, but the underlying driving force that we are now suffering from in this country is greed. There's never enough. There's never too much. Back in the 80s, Ronald Reagan instituted the trickle-down theory for economics. Increase the wealth of the rich, and they will spend more money, and money will trickle down to us commoners. This economic theory did not work as well as it was intended to. The money did not trickle down. It stayed where it was. However, the hope and the expectations of more money and the acquisition of more goods did not just trickle down, it washed down over the rest of the country. If the desire for getting rich and buying things is ubiquitous in this country, including to me, I want things, then it is personified by a popular, if minority, expression of Christianity, the prosperity gospel. Subtitle, God wants you rich. What a beguiling proposition. God wants me rich. All I have to do is give God, through his representative, a lot of money, and I'll get a lot of it back. It is a very transactional theology. It is very self-centered. Like the old prayer a preacher told me about once, God bless me and my wife, John and his wife, us four no more. This form of Christianity has as little regard for the tenets of the Christian religion as industrialization has for the environment. Progress, products, profits, the 3 Ps are the great motivators of our culture. As Ronald Reagan said in the 50s, speaking for General Electric, progress is our most important product. Little attention is paid by the dominant culture to the indigenous people who would offer a different path. The creation stories of our people are far different. We have different focuses of action. Many of our stories are similar in nature, but none of them is considered in any way to be more valid than any other. None of us would say our story should take priority over your story. We don't put our history in a timeline, a linear timeline, although I have received phone calls from grandchildren who have said, Grandma, we're supposed to interview somebody in our family. So tell me, what was it like growing up with the dinosaurs? We understand our stories are metaphors that teach us how to live in balance and with respect for all those around us. And I should note that in no native language is there a word for religion. What we believe, how we act, what we do is intrinsic to living in balance. That is our religion. So our creation stories begin with the premise that history began before human beings. The world was ancient before human beings. And then when human beings emerged or were called into being, they were given the original instructions. I like the Anishinaabe story of Nanabuzu, the original man, being set down in a world that was fully peopled by plants and animals, winds and waters, a world that was already ancient. His first work was to walk through the world which Sky Woman danced into being. He was to walk in such a way that each step was a greeting to Mother Earth. Nanabuzu was also to name the animals, but he was to live with them and get to know them and have them tell him who they were. That was his original instruction. And so our ceremonies, all of our, we don't even have a word for worship, but all that we do is in gratitude for what we have been given on Mother Earth, for the bounty that we have been given, for the lessons that we have learned. Living on Mother Earth is what we're called to do, living with Mother Earth. As the Cherokee Catechism says, my mother born me, the Creator breathed in me the breath of life and set me on this earth to walk the path of harmony and balance. And if I have respect for Mother Earth, for my community, for myself, when I walk through the western door, I will be greeted by all of my ancestors and taken to a seat by the sacred fire. Occasionally someone will tell me, "Oh, I just love Indians. You are so spiritual." No, we're not. We're not called to be spiritual. We're called to live on this earth, to find the heart and the spirit of all things on Mother Earth, and to care for Mother Earth in the same way as we care for our children. It's very difficult for us in these days of the diaspora, after all of the trails of tears and what have you, to be able to perform our ceremonies properly. And after all of this time, some of us, many of us, have begun to lose the basic ideas of what it means to be Indian, of what our ceremonies are all about. Henry Dawes, the senator who is the creator of the infamous Dawes Rule, opined that Indians would never become civilized until they learned to be selfish. And the Indians said, "Someone wants to be civilized, yeah." But I'll tell you a story, because Indian people have not learned this aspect of civilization. We haven't learned to be selfish. Where I live, down in Pike County, in south central Ohio, there are a lot of Indian people. You wouldn't know it by the census, but there are. And most of us, not me, most of us have no money. We're very poor. And yet there is the greatest attitude of unselfishness among our people. When my son Seth and his wife Elizabeth were pregnant with their baby, Nancy and her daughter Jamie were very excited for us. And Nancy called me one day and said, "We have a pack and play that we'd like to do, it's for Jamie's babies, and we'd like to give it to you so you can have it at your house when the baby comes. You'll have a pack and play." And "Oh, thank you, they brought it." The problem was everybody in their house smoked. And this thing, they washed it, they cleaned it. It smelled terrible. It was awful. And I thought, I can't let my grandbaby sleep in that. So Elizabeth and I got to talking and came up with a story. And I called Nancy and I said, Elizabeth was a teacher. They moved to Vermont, but she was a teacher in Trimble, Ohio, if you're familiar with that area. A very, very poor area. And so I called Nancy and said, Elizabeth has this student who's pregnant. And we were wondering if you would mind if we would give the pack and play to this fictional student, although there were pregnant girls, and so that she will have something to put the baby in. And I'm thinking, because I don't want to be mean, and I can't just throw the thing away because they'll be looking for it, when they come. And so Nancy and Jamie said, "Oh yes, that'd be wonderful." Then they called me back and they said, "Listen, with our next check, we can go get some onesies and some Pampers." I'm going, "Oh my God." Never even tell a nice lie to unselfish Indian people. I'm telling you, it took a while to get away from that one. What does this have to do with the environment? Everything. As we are concerned with one another, we have to be concerned for our environment, for our world. Mother Earth is gasping, and we've seen the results of her pain in this last week. Human problems have been made even higher by our disregard for Mother Earth. Unfortunately, we continue with the drilling and clear cutting the forests, taking over croplands for construction, unfettered development in very sensitive areas, and industrial and political resistance to taking seriously the needs of Mother Earth. Our societies, our policies, our economies, our attitudes of self-involvement have been brought to a crisis point. We have progressed beyond ourselves, beyond the point in which we can care for our populations or for Mother Earth. It's complicated. We still have to have heat and we have to have air conditioning. We need food to feed everyone, although we don't know how to distribute it equitably. And evidently, we're not able to provide food that is not laden with chemicals and antibiotics and hormones. In our egocentric lives, not many of us are able or willing to exhibit the self-discipline of our Depression era parents and grandparents. Use it up, wear it out, make do, or do without. For Indians, our hearts, our minds, our souls, our daily lives are concerned with the footprint we leave on Mother Earth. We do not have we do have the sacred knowledge, the heart, the spirit of living on Mother Earth. We know how. And our elders have said, when you can no longer survive the way you live, come to us and we will teach you. We cannot change the future of our environment until we, all of us, including the oligarchs and the politicians, the entrepreneurs, and the entitled, the change of heart and spirit, and learn that without a change of heart, we are initiating our own destruction. If we are to survive, we must transform our lives, our spirits. As our ancient prayer says, look outward seriously, look inward intently, look outward carefully, look inward diligently, look outward respectfully, look inward humbly. We don't stop at our eyes. We don't begin at our skin. We don't end at our smell. We don't start at our soul sounds. I can lose my legs and go on living. I can lose my eyes and go on living. I can lose my hair, my nose, my hands, my arms, and go on living. But if I lose the water, I die. If I lose the air, I die. If I lose the sun, I die. If I lose the plants and animals, I die. For all of these things are more a part of me, more essential to my being than that which I call my body. Live gently on Mother Earth. Walk the path. What up? One last thing, if they're trying to watch time, if you want to contribute, please do. Any lawyers in here? We have to be very concerned about law. Land. Air. Water. Law. We can remember this. Maybe we can help make a difference. Any questions? Comments?
I just want to thank you so much. You teach us respect teach us diligence, and you teach us by the way you live. And that's the way your elders must have lived.
Thank you. Yeah. Anybody want to argue with this?
I want to cry about it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Probably extremely on point. I just found one that's a great thing. Sorry I missed the first part, but I just found it very fascinating and interesting. You talk about the different ways of thinking, the mythology, the philosophy, the science, and how they're all ways of understanding. And that makes sense, but it caught my attention because there are religionists and scientists who will argue vociferously that they are utterly, and I think the how is very different, but like utterly fundamentally different out of Stephen Jay Gould's non-overlapping magisterium. So say that fast 5 times. And the point of that was, one, I think he was trying to get creationist politicians off of his back so he can do science. But it's the idea that science is the reality and tells you the how. Religion will just let you tell it's a lie. So I just think that's an interesting juxtaposition of some fundamental philosophical differences in science and certain aspects of religion, but at the same time, it's a collective way of understanding what is and in some cases. Sorry.
And if we can listen to one another and interact with one another, we see that science is not the whole answer, nor is religion the whole answer. That together we can come up with creative solutions to take care of these problems. Because, my friend Marilyn was talking about some pictures I put on Facebook of our dogs. We have 5 large dogs. And not too long ago, there was this article that scientists believe that dogs understand, we've just discovered that dogs understand a lot more than we thought they did. I was like, don't you have a dog? Don't you ever pay attention to dogs? But it's that kind of thing. I'm always one to believe in study. I'm not a scientist, and I'm not an economist, and I can appreciate the virtues of it. But I want scientists and economists to appreciate ours too.
I mean, maybe it's obvious to everyone, that's often the case when I say something, but the irony is, for me, that the information that you give us has always been conveyed as myths,
Yes.
as folklore, and that especially it's apparent in terms of climate, it's the more scientific direction that, and our understandings that, and our, the people who came before, their understanding of the Bible was, totally, manifest destiny was what they were going for. Greed was somehow, just fine. But they considered that the truth and the stories as they understood them to be false.
Right.
And you're bringing forward the facts that, dang it, if we had listened more and incorporated in some way some of the practices of the original people, that things would be different today.
I agree.
I think that's why everyone's so sad.
Certainly, if you look at the original pilgrims, they had to be taught how to use this land here, because they came from a totally different climate, a different, a whole different environment.
Survival.
but Indians didn't know how to use the land. I do have to share one thing because I think it's ironic. Hobby Lobby. I don't like to go to Hobby Lobby, but the guy who founded Hobby Lobby is very, very wealthy and a very right-wing Christian, and he thanks God for blessing his business. So middle of September, they've got all the Christmas decorations out, middle of September, and little signs, Jesus is the reason for the season. I think that's funny. It's okay, Mr. Green. Yeah. So that was just an aside. But yeah, no.
We're, excuse me, we are doing this year a Bible study on the environment at Horizons, which is a Presbyterian women's group. And the one that we had this past week was land justice. And it spoke about all these issues. There's a map on the internet you can look at and find out what Native American peoples lived where we were. One of the things that the woman pointed out when she had written it was that there are places all over the world where they are trying to return land to the native populations. And she said in most cases, the land is healing, which I thought was really interesting. And even in the United States, this is true.
If you've noticed, when Indians were moved out of their homelands, they were put on land nobody else wanted. And then, especially out west, and then they began to discover, like on the Nez Perce land, there was uranium. Oh, we want that back again. Yeah. And that's what it is. We live not far from a place that used to be called USEC, the Uranium Corporation, and so they had to close down because of all the pollution and what have you. And there was this white guy who decided that to try to use me as his spokesperson to get all that land back from the USEC land for the Indians. And he said, wouldn't you like to have your own land to do your ceremonies on? And I said, yes, we could have them at night so we can glow in the dark. There's some land we don't want back. But what's more important to us, and it's still going on, is the returning of native skeletal remains. But yeah.
Comes into mind. Thank you. What comes into mind is justice. Justice.
Interesting.
Yeah, and also he always put on the prosperity gospel.
On what?
The prosperity gospel.
Oh,
Well, it's she teaches theology at one university, so it's the years that she spent trying to understand it, not being part of it, trying to understand it.
Y'all. I'm from Southern Ohio, so you may remember that I said that I was an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, and when I was in seminary in the early '80s. That was just the beginnings of the rise of some of this. It had been going on, but it was becoming more prominent because television was now very active in some of this stuff. And in one class, we were watching films of some of these prosperity gospelers, and Jim Baker and Tammy Faye, and we were laughing. And we thought, what was wrong with us? Because we didn't take it seriously. And I take that seriously. Because, especially what's his name, Pat Robertson and his whole thing, because they started way back in the 70s saying we have to get people elected at lower levels, and so that eventually we can take over the country and we can institute our Christian policies.
Just like Project 2025.
Thank you for saying that, because I was not going to. Yeah. So, well, anyway, it's a real pleasure. It's this is a distressing topic. And next week I'm going to talk about the trees. I will say one more thing, very quickly. I had to make a very quick trip to Arizona this summer, and all these things kept going through my mind, especially as I was driving through Oklahoma, 104-degree weather, and my air conditioning car went out, and I was whining about that. And then I tried to remember, look, this is the same area my ancestors were moved to, so quit whining. And then I called my son. I don't know why I thought to call him, because he laughed. And he said, Mom, there hasn't always been air conditioning in cars, you know. Bless his heart. And, but my sister and I, she lives outside of Prescott, Arizona. We're talking about the aquifers and how they're feeling, and how there's unfettered growth in that whole area. They're not paying any attention to how many people are using the water in the water table. You know more about these things than I do. And then, although the Gila band of Indians down outside of Phoenix, I think, they have canals, and that's a great source for losing water, for evaporation. They have started building solar panels over the canals to save the water and then to produce electricity. So that's one suggestion. But the other thing I saw on my way back, watching TV in the hotel one night, house hunters, some family wanted to buy a house in the Arizona Keys. What is that? I was appalled. Along the Colorado River, there's this housing development right on the Colorado River, and they have built canals into the land, and they have these high-end, multi-million-dollar houses for sale. And the more expensive ones, you've got a view right there of the river, and others you're sitting on the canal. And I'm thinking,
The water's hardly enough to run through the canyon.
don't they know where they are? So, yeah, these are things that are real, that are challenges facing us.
I get a lot of mailings, and I have contributed to organizations like the Arbor Foundation and the World Wildlife Federation. And I'm thinking about organizations like that. What can I do? I can do whatever I can to support them as they're spreading the message. I'm thinking about the rise in spirituality in our country, which is meditation and contemplation, and a lot of this is to take place in nature or green areas that you have right there on the other side of the windows. And I think I can't do a whole lot, but I can let myself grow. I can support organizations and peoples who are out there speaking like Jean is doing here, because I think that we cannot do anything really big, but I think that it begins with us.
I agree, because I have 1/3 of an acre of land where my house is. And I try to grow plants that will attract bees and butterflies. I have a rain garden so that it catches the water and it puts it back into the aquifer instead of running off into the streets and down sewers and things. And I try really hard to keep the deer from eating everything. They fall down.
That's an easy battle, right?
It's a losing battle. Yeah, you should see it. I mean, they haven't left a leaf. And I planted trees so there's shade, and where things fall out underneath the trees, I leave them so that they can biodegrade into the ground. When I put mulch on my yard, it's composted leaf mulch. You know, there are things you can do right in your own little space that will make a difference in the environment.
Thank you. I don't want y'all to be late for church.
Thank you.